Hello and welcome. This is Kokeb Germa McDonald. I'm an occupational therapist and a parent coach. In this video, I wanted to teach you a little bit about what primitive reflexes are and how you can identify signs and symptoms of a retained reflex in your child's body. I'm going to share my screen here so we can go over some of the reflexes here. Hopefully you can see it here. You can see my screen here. So what we're going to be talking about is how to identify signs and symptoms of retained reflexes in your child. Again, my name is Kokeb Germa McDonald. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and I'm an author of a series called Integrating Primitive Reflexes Through Play and Exercises. I've been writing a book for the Moro Reflex, and then the new one is coming out for the ATNR Reflex. So the objective of this presentation is I have four objectives for this one. The first one is to help you understand the common primitive reflexes and their benefits. And I want you to understand what primitive reflex integration and retention are. And I want you to understand and identify negative symptoms and behaviors that arise with retained reflexes. As you're working with your child, I want you to be able to see some of the behavior and motor or sensory issues that your child is having, and to connect it with the reflex that might be retained in the body. And at the end of this presentation, I also want you to learn the therapeutic exercises you can do to help your child. So the question is, what are primitive reflexes? Primitive reflexes are involuntary movement patterns that emerge in utero and are present at birth. And these reflexes should remain active for the first few months of the infant's life, and afterwards they should be integrated. So infants need to survive. Infants need these reflexes in order to survive. So we definitely need to see these reflexes present in utero and during birth and after birth. And afterwards, we want to see these reflexes to be integrated. When we say integrated, we mean inhibited, we mean dormant, we mean that these reflexes are not controlling the child's or the adult's movement. The adult is able to move comfortably without being controlled by these reflexes. And how our primitive reflexes are integrated. And usually it's just the natural way. So during the birthing process, these reflexes start to be integrated. During early childhood movement patterns, all the movement patterns, the natural movement patterns we see with babies and infants, these are nature's way of integrating these reflexes. So we definitely wanted to see the rocking and the rolling and the mimicking all these child movement patterns. We want to see this repetitive movement that every child does. We want to see infants go through the natural milestone. That's why it's very important for us to go back and see which milestone the child is able to do, which one was harder for that child. So we wanted to see all these things come to fruition. If any of those milestones are missed or skipped, we see a dysfunction in the child. So when the baby is exploring and learning, touching things and putting in their mouth, that's all in nature's way of integration. So it's proper for the babies to go through that. They need room, they need place to roll around, to explore, to move. So we need a lot of movement for these for infants to integrate these reflexes. So when primitive reflexes become inhibited, again, we say when they're retained, when they're dormant, more coordinated and mature movement patterns called the postural reflexes develop. So we want, in order for the baby to, let's say, to go from reflexively moving to purposefully rolling, we need to see integration to happen from trying to move around, kicking, to pulling up and to standing, to have trunk control and to have motor coordination and visual eye-hand coordination. All those developmental movements and development that happens when these primitive reflexes are naturally inhibited and well. So these postural reflexes are mature patterns of responses that control balance, motor coordination, and sensori motor development. So you can think of primitive reflexes being the foundation of the child's development. This is the bottom. So the first thing you wanted to see happen is these primitive reflexes, one, present and active, then integrating. So they're the foundation for every developmental patterns. So that's why it's very important to go back to these foundation to work on these things and these reflexes, because you see the control and the motor coordination, sensory issues, everything built on these primitive reflexes. For the postural reflex to work well, for our kids to move well, to understand the environment, to understand what's happening, and to be able to catch and throw a ball, to be able to ride a bike, or even socially interact, being comfortable with their environment, being at peace and at ease with their environment, because they're processing it well, because these primitive reflexes are integrated. Okay, so we definitely wanted to see these foundational primitive reflexes to integrate for these postural reflexes to work. So for this video, we're going to talk about the one of these reflexes called the Moro Reflex. In this picture, you can see this movement pattern. And the way I will explain it is show you what this reflex is, when it's originate, when the onset of it, and when it should be dormant, and what it looks like in the child, and what happens when this reflex is present in the child's body. So the first one we'll talk about is the Moro Reflex. So the Moro Reflex is the onset it's in the utero before the child is born, and it should be present when the child is born during the birthing process, and integrates around 4 months after birth. So we definitely need to see this. This is one of the key reflexes. Every reflex is important, but this is definitely one of the foundation. So what are the benefit of the Moro Reflex? Infants is definitely the first infant survival. Okay, the Moro Reflex helps the infant take the first breath. So if let me go back. Let's see if I can go back. You can see this movement pattern. Okay, when the child is with the Moro Reflex, what happens is when the child is head goes backwards, almost like a falling sensation, when it feels like it's dropped, or when there's a loud noise, or you tap, or anything that startles the baby, the infant, you see this kind of response. Eyes open up, you see fingers opening up and arms extending, you see legs extending, and immediately it goes back in this protective mechanism. You see eyes closing, the body goes in this infant position, and you see here the arms closing in as well as the legs closing in. This is the reflex. So what happens is, like, the child would not be able to control it. Okay, see, the primitive reflex goes through the brainstem, so it's not going, and then the child is not able. It's not something that the child's going to control. Again, it's a reflex. So this is the pattern it goes through. So you will see this active Moro with these infants in the baby stage, and you wanted to see that. Again, it's going back is important for survival. It helps with infants' first breath when it comes out of the womb, and it's connected to all other senses. This is why the Moro Reflex is very crucial. It's connected to sight, touch, auditory, taste, vestibular system. Vestibular system is a system, it's in your ear. It helps us know where we are in space, where our head is in space, a sense of balance. So that is why when the head is going backwards and the child feels threatened and reacts. The only reflex that's connected to all other senses and can be influenced by all, and also influences all sensory functions. So it's very important for us to start with the Moro reflex, because the Moro reflex also influences our fight or flight reaction. So the brain has to feel safe in order to learn. So this is where we wanted to start, to even train parents. This is where we wanted to address first. We want to first teach the parent to teach their kids, or the clinician to work with their kids to feel safe. Then we'll deal with learning. And the Moro reflex also helps as the protective response. And it's important for the baby to have this reflex in infant stage, because that's how caregivers know if the kid is threatened, feeling unsafe. So all of this comes together, and it's very important to have the Moro reflex. So then what happens if the Moro reflex stays in the body and not retained? So this is what you're going to see. This is usually when a lot of clients come to our case to OT when they have these kind of symptoms, right? They have a sensitivity to sound, auditory defensiveness. They'll have gravitational insecurity, meaning they're afraid to climbing ladders, climbing on play structure. They don't want to leave the ground. They fear falling, difficulty shutting down background noise. This also goes with the auditory system, visual perceptual problems, not able to have a good visual ground, not be able to have a good visual perceptual skills, and light sensitivity. Again, we talked about how the Moro reflex affects all the sensory, right? So you see that happening here. And we also see social skills and behavior. Okay, imagine when your sensory system is not working well and everything is overwhelming. So what happens is you start having a behavior response to it, right? So these kids become rigid because they can't control their environment, what's coming into their sensory. So they become almost controlling and rigid in their play. They'll have difficulty with transitioning, and they'll have difficulty with social playing skills, because it takes a lot of understanding of what's happening with social to have a good social skill. You need to understand what's happening in your environment. You need to be able to, and then you have to be safe enough to even observe those things, right? So you need to also be able to identify facial expression and what's happening, and you need to also have a good motor skills to play these games. So there's so much that goes with it. So these kids become challenged in this area. Social and interaction and play, joining an activity would be hard for them. They'll have reduced attention, and they might have ADD or ADHD tendencies, because all the information is coming together and not able to sift through them. So they might have a hard time with that as well. And they will have increased distractibility and easily startled and fearful, and after a while becomes a learned thing. So they anticipate, and you see anxiety and stress when it comes to certain activities and social activities. So another thing you'll see is poor balance. Again, we talked about gravitational insecurity. So you'll see poor balance, poor coordination, poor right and left discrimination. You have increased fight and flight responses or anxiety, like I say. And then if you have increased fight or flight response, you have an increased amount of stress hormone, cortisol in the body, which affects their immune system. So you might have kids who are prone to allergies and a lot of stomach issues or pain, and they easily get sick. because they live in high stress. So the stress affects their body, and again, it creates this cycle, right? So the behavior and the social skills creates this cycle and feeds on each other. Okay, so that is all for today. So I just wanted to just come here and talk to you a little bit about the Moro Reflex. And now next video, we will talk about the palmar reflex. If you have any question, feel free to contact me, leave me a message, and look for the next video. And I'm happy to help. And have a great day, and bye.